Tonight we'll drift through 6 simple dishes, each one a quiet comfort from a kitchen past. Some came from seaside cafes, others from humble staff rooms or early morning bakeries, but all of them in their own way are soft steps toward rest. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let the warmth of familiar flavors guide you gently towards sleep. The first recipe tonight is pickled egg with sea salt and a buttered cracker. The first time I saw him do it, I thought it was a joke. 1 pickled egg, plucked from a cloudy jar near the fryer, a tiny plate. Sea salt in a ramekin. 1 plain cracker, generously buttered. He arranged it like a ritual. Then he ate it, quietly, without comment, standing at the pass while the kitchen lights buzzed low and the last drunk punters were herded gently into the street. His name was Joe. He'd been cooking since long before gastropubs existed, back when a cook's only measure was how well he could work a grill and hold his drink. But there was something meditative about how he ended each shift. Not with a pint, but with that small plate. He called it his closing bite, a way to draw a line under the day. I started asking about it on the 4th or 5th week. "It's just a pickled egg," I said, trying not to sound like I was mocking it. He shook his head. "Not just. The vinegars, the punctuation. The egg's the soft bit. Salt keeps it honest. Butter smooths it all out." It was poetic in its own way, and I was young enough to want to believe there was meaning in every bite. He taught me how to make the eggs from scratch. White wine vinegar, a dash of mustard seed, bay leaf, black peppercorns, and a touch of sugar. Boil the eggs hard, but not rubbery. Shell and slip them into the brine while still warm. "They've got to learn the new world while they're still soft," he'd say. That was Joe for you. Everything had a reason, even if it wasn't written down. We'd taste them after 3 days, but he said 7 was better. You want them just shy of sharp. On Sunday nights, when the dining room emptied early and the pub was half lit with the last of the bar light, we'd make our own plates. 1 egg, halved, a sprinkle of flake salt on the yolk, a cracker, slathered with room temp salted butter, never fridge cold. You'd eat the egg and cracker in 1 bite, letting the vinegary edge hit first, then the creamy yolk, the crunch, the salt, small, sharp, certain. That was the word he always came back to, certain. You can't guarantee a shift. Orders go wrong, suppliers flake, but this you can trust. After he retired, I kept making them, less out of habit, more out of a need to ground the end of certain days. The ones that didn't feel finished. The ones that left a question mark hanging. And that 1 bite, with all its contradiction, tangy, soft, salted, smooth, still holds more clarity than any closing comment I've ever heard in a kitchen. When I teach now, I tell my students that not every recipe is a signature dish. Some are signatures in quieter ways. A pickled egg, a cracker, a ritual that tells you without doubt or decoration, the day is done. Good night. That was recipe 1. The second recipe tonight is half a cold pork pie with English mustard. He was not a man of indulgence. That's what struck me first. My mentor at Le Gavroche, sharp jacket, clean hands, eyes that could cut through chaos on the pass, seemed to live off espresso, adrenaline, and the occasional curse whispered in French under his breath. But at exactly 12:05 a.m., after the final ticket had been wiped off the board, after the kitchen's clang had faded to a low murmur of pans soaking and fridges humming, he would vanish. Not for long. 5, maybe 10 minutes. No one followed him. You don't follow the man who trained half the kitchen. I did once, not out of disrespect, out of curiosity. I stepped into the walk-in just as he was setting the lid back on a Tupperware, sliding it neatly behind a tray of chantilly cream. That's when I saw it. The pork pie, British, unapologetic, squat, and golden. the kind with thick crust and a dense peppered meat center encased in jelly. Beside it, a small spoonful of Coleman's mustard in an old ramekin. No bigger than a thumbprint. He didn't acknowledge me. Just sliced a clean wedge, precise as always, dipped the edge into the mustard and ate it cold. Not rushed, not slow, just present. He once said to me, "Pork pies are not for showing off. They're for keeping your feet on the ground." And I think I finally understood what he meant that night. After service, when your nerves are frayed and your head is still replaying orders, you don't want poetry. You want something that doesn't demand a performance. Cold, savory, familiar. It wasn't just the food, it was the silence. A heavy, thoughtful stillness that filled the space after the last plate was sent. He didn't eat the pork pie to treat himself. He ate it to end the day, and in a way to return to being human again, after hours of performing like a machine. Over time, I took up the ritual. Never the same pie, but the same idea. Sometimes store-bought, sometimes made from scratch when I had the foresight. The jelly should tremble, not melt. The crust should give a slight crunch, even when chilled. And the mustard, bright yellow, unapologetically hot, should bite, just enough to wake the senses, but not overwhelm. I never told him I'd picked it up. He wouldn't have said anything anyway. Years later, when I found myself in charge of a brigade, I noticed how I, too, began keeping something back in the fridge. Not a pie, always, but something honest, something that didn't need a garnish, a piece of food that asked nothing of you except to be eaten. Preferably alone, preferably without a word. Because some of the best lessons in a kitchen don't come on the pass. They come in the walk-in, in the quiet, over a slice of cold pie, eaten with mustard and memory. Good night. That was recipe 2. The third recipe tonight is cheddar on toast with Worcestershire sauce, grilled until bubbling. Was 22, living alone in a creaky, crooked flat above a butcher in Kent. The walls were thin, the windows always fogged, and the kitchen was barely wide enough to stretch both arms. But it had a working grill, and for a while that was all I needed. That period of my life was marked by long days of prep work and longer nights of wandering. I wasn't always cooking for others back then. Sometimes just myself, sometimes not at all. But what I made most often, what I came back to, like a song on repeat, was cheese on toast. Not just any cheese on toast. A bubbling, blistered slab of cheddar, melted over thick bread, anointed with Worcestershire sauce in streaks like brushstrokes. The bread was usually whatever I had. Half-stale sourdough from the corner shop. Thick slices of white tin loaf, if I was feeling indulgent. Always toasted hard enough to keep structure under the weight of melted cheese. Always layered with far more cheddar than was reasonable. I didn't bother with bechamel or ale, or the frills of traditional Welsh rarebit. At 3 a.m., you don't crave complexity, you crave gravity. I'd come home from the pub, sometimes tipsy, sometimes not, kick off my boots, and head straight to the grill. No preamble. Just bread, cheese, sauce, heat. The ritual was oddly meditative. I'd slice the cheddar by hand, never grated, because I liked watching it melt in slow tectonic shifts. The Worcestershire would go on after the cheese, never before, so it cut through the richness with sharp little streaks of vinegar and spice. Then under the grill, watching it swell and bubble, edges burning just slightly, like a browned crust on a lasagna. It was always slightly burned. I insisted on it. That was part of the rite. The singe is the soul, I used to mutter, defending my charred corners against anyone who dared critique them. I ate it standing up, elbows on the counter, occasionally over the sink, if I was feeling contemplative or drunk. The toast scalding, the cheese stringing into my lap, the Worcestershire sauce catching in the back of my throat, just enough to remind me I was alive. It was perfect. That was the first dish I ever became protective of. My own personal religion, made from odds and ends. I could make it blindfolded, one arm behind my back, and I'd argue about its merits with any chef, any critic, any mate who suggested there might be a better version. This was the better version, burned, bubbling, and entirely mine. I haven't lived in Kent in years, but sometimes, when I come home late and the world feels too wide or too quiet, I find myself pulling bread from the freezer, slicing cheddar thick, and reaching for the bottle of Worcestershire like it's a prayer. Because some nights don't need talking. The day is done. Good night. The fourth recipe tonight is salted boiled potatoes with a bit of butter and cracked pepper. Some foods don't ask to be admired. They're not built for centerpieces, not engineered for the camera, not meant to dazzle. They're the foods that stay when everything else gets complicated. The ones that whisper, "This is enough." For me, that dish has always been salted boiled potatoes. I first learned to appreciate them, not as a chef, but as someone who had gone too far into finesse, into impressing, into chasing the next clever plate. I was staging at a modern Nordic restaurant in Copenhagen, hyper-precise, plated with tweezers. The kind of kitchen where even the dirt on the carrots had to come from a specific hillside. And after service one night, bone-tired and half-frozen from the walk back to the star flat, I saw one of the line cooks, a quiet Finnish lad named Timo, pull a small pot from the back of the shared fridge, just potatoes, tiny yellow-fleshed ones, boiled in aggressively salted water, still in their jackets. No sauce, no oil, no garnish, just a bit of cold butter and a twist of pepper from the grinder he carried in his knife roll, like a secret. He offered me a few, shrugged, and said, "Reset food." We sat on the tile floor, backs against the cupboard, and we ate in silence. Timo told me later that his grandmother boiled potatoes every night in winter. Said it kept the house grounded. Not everything has to be exciting, he told me. Just honest, just there. I never forgot that. Especially when the stress of service pushed me toward the edge of burnout. Or when dishes started to feel like theater more than sustenance. Here's how I make them now, when I need something to come back to. I start with the potatoes. Small ones are best, Yukon Gold, Charlotte, or fingerlings, if I can find them. I give them a rinse, but never peel them. The skins carry character. I place them in a saucepan and fill it with cold water, covering the potatoes by about an inch. Then the salt, enough to taste like the sea, more than you think. It seasons them from the inside out. I bring them to a gentle boil, not a rapid one. Let them move slowly in the water. I use that time to clean the kitchen, to breathe, to let the noise of the day simmer down with them. After about 15-20 minutes, I check them with a fork. There should be just a bit of give, like the soft part of your thumb. I drain them, but never rinse. I want the steam to carry the salt to the skin. While they're still hot, I toss them back in the warm pot and drop in a knob of butter, just enough to melt and coat. I swirl the pot gently, not to mash, just to gloss. Then I grind fresh black pepper over the top, coarse, fragrant, just enough to remind the tongue that simplicity still has dimension. That's it. I serve them in a shallow bowl, warm, unadorned, sometimes with a spoon, sometimes with fingers. I eat them slowly, letting the salt and butter coat the mouth like a balm. It's not a showstopper, and that's the point. These potatoes are not for celebration. They are for restoration. I make them when my appetite doesn't know what it wants. When the noise of the world has been too clever, too fast, too much. When I need something that simply is. And each time I think of Timo, of that quiet kitchen, of the long Scandinavian winter, and the steady calm of boiled potatoes in a cold ceramic bowl. No need for flair, no need to explain, just food that tells you, you're home now. Let's reset. So if the day was too much, and you don't want to be amazed, you just want to be okay, try this. Salt the water well. Boil the potatoes gently. Butter them while they're still steaming. And let the first bite remind you, it's enough. Good night. That was recipe 4. The 5th recipe tonight is leftover roast chicken on a cold roll with mayo and cress. Not every sandwich is made in the light. Some are pieced together under the hush of the extraction fan, elbows brushing past stacked ramekins and cling-wrapped prep trays. Some are made standing, quietly behind the pass after the lunch rush, when the kitchen feels like it's just exhaled. This roll, cold roast chicken, a slick of mayo, a few fronds of cress was one of those. We didn't call it a recipe. We didn't talk about it at all, really. It was just what happened. When the plates had been wiped and the last tickets were gone, when your stomach caught up with you and reminded you it had been working just as hard. The chicken usually came from a bird we'd roasted for staff, or a test dish that never made it to service. Pulled from the carcass in ragged, honest strips. No carving finesse, no glistening, just whatever we could rescue before the bones went to stock. The bread was usually soft, nothing crusty or architectural. We didn't want resistance. We wanted yielding. Rolls from the corner bakery if someone had remembered to grab them that morning. Sometimes leftover brioche buns from the brunch shift. Sometimes even hamburger buns. No one cared. The point was that they held the filling and got out of the way. I'd grab a clean spoon and swipe on the mayo, store-bought, no shame. Not artfully piped or whipped with vinegar, just a cool, creamy layer to carry the chicken. A smear on both sides of the roll. That was key. Keeps it from feeling dry, especially when the meat's been in the walk-in half the day. Then the cress. A humble handful, peppery, fresh, green enough to lift the whole thing without making it noble. It didn't pretend to be salad, it was contrast. A splash of bite to keep the bread and meat from feeling too same. We never toasted it. That would have taken time. And this wasn't a meal made for patience. This was hunger meeting opportunity in the 5-minute window between cleanup and prep for dinner. You'd lean over the sink or sit on an upturned crate by dry goods, your apron still damp, your feet sore. And for those few mouthfuls, nothing else really mattered. I remember once, late summer, we had a roast with lemon and thyme going spare. The skin had gone slack in the fridge, but the meat still held that herby edge. I piled it into a floury bap, heavy on the mayo, and one of the younger chefs walked by and said, "That smells better than half the stuff we sent out today." He wasn't wrong. There's something about food that isn't trying, food that isn't looking to be remembered, but ends up etched in your bones all the same. Here's how I make it now. When I need to taste those quiet moments again, start with leftover roast chicken. Ideally, not fresh out of the oven. It wants to be cold, firm, pulled from the fridge, with that savory chill only roasted meat carries. Tear it into bite-sized pieces. Don't overthink the shapes. Take a soft white roll, slice it open gently, not all the way through, like a hinge. Spread good mayo, on both sides. Be generous. If you're feeling thoughtful, you can stir in a dash of mustard or a crack of pepper. But honestly, plain works best. Layer in the chicken, compact it slightly, so every bite gives you meat and bread and mayo. Then scatter over a handful of cress. Watercress if you can find it. Garden cress if you're lucky. Even rocket in a pinch, though it's not quite the same. Close the roll. Don't press it. Let it sit a moment while you pour a glass of tap water or just lean on the counter. Eat it standing. It's not a meal for plates. And as you bite through, bread yielding, mayo cool, chicken savory, cress sharp, you might just feel something settle. A reminder that comfort doesn't need to be curated. That food, at its best, doesn't have to perform. It just has to be there when you need it most. Good night. That was recipe 5. The 6th recipe tonight is savory oatmeal with olive oil and a soft egg. Some recipes come with lore, not the kind that's written down in books, but the kind spoken at tired hours in half-lit kitchens, shared between chefs, not as instruction but as offering. The pastry chef who first told me about this dish was from Glasgow. A force in the kitchen, tattooed arms, sharp tongue, hands that shaped sugar like sculpture. But there was softness in her too. At the end of the night, after the last tart had been glazed and the trays scrubbed clean, she'd make this savory oatmeal, finished with a swirl of olive oil and a soft egg. She claimed it helped her sleep. Granny food for a warrior's sleep, she'd say. And something about that felt true. We'd laugh, but I watched her eat it slowly, steadily, like it was both her last ritual and her first comfort. She showed me once how she did it, not in the kitchen, but in the staff room, with a battered electric kettle and a single hob plate. Said the trick was to treat the oats like rice. Don't just drown them, coax them, stirring gently, salting at the right time. And always, always finishing with good oil, and the egg just barely set. She believed it mattered how you cooked for yourself, that when the clatter of service ended, you owed yourself a dish that required just enough care to bring you back to earth. I started making it too. Quietly, at home. On nights when my brain wouldn't stop replaying the dinner shift, or when dreams threatened to rattle the few hours of rest I had. It wasn't flashy. There was no garnish, no plating, but every bite had ballast, warm, soft, seasoned. Like being reminded the day was over, and that was enough. Here's how I make it now, and why I always keep oats in the cupboard. Start with rolled oats, not instant, not steel cut. You want something in between, quick and stubborn. I measure out half a cup and place it in a small saucepan with a full cup of water and a pinch of salt. Bring it to a gentle simmer, stirring now and then, not to hurry it, but to encourage the oats to bloom. Let them cook until soft but still, with a bit of give, about 6-8 minutes. If the mixture gets too tight, add a splash more water. It should finish like a soft risotto, loose, creamy, spoonable. Off the heat, I sometimes add a touch of grated cheese, or a few drops of soy sauce, whatever the mood calls for. But never too much. The simplicity is part of the grounding. Now the egg. In another pot, I gently lower one into simmering water, 6.5 minutes, give or take, for a yolk that's barely set, but not runny. Then I plunge it into cold water, just long enough to peel it clean. I pour the oats into a bowl, make a small well in the center, and drizzle in a thread of good olive oil. Grassy, peppery, full of body. Then I nestle the egg in the middle, crack it gently, to reveal the custard-like center. A pinch of salt over top maybe some black pepper, if the day had teeth, and then I eat, not at a table. Usually standing by the window, or perched on the sofa edge. The oats are soft, the oil rich, the egg anchoring it all, like a moon in a quiet sky. No crunch, no sugar, no show, just warmth, slow salt, and sleep. Some nights, I don't need anything else. Just a reminder that food can still be gentle. That not everything needs to be gourmet. Sometimes you just need something humble to carry you into rest. And if you sleep well after, maybe it wasn't just the oats. Maybe it was permission to stop, to settle, to soften. Good night. That was recipe 6. The 7th recipe tonight is crackers with Stilton and a thin slice of apple. There are nights when you don't want to cook, not out of laziness, but because silence feels more nourishing than heat. When the kitchen's dim and the day has been loud, I find my way to the pantry, not the stove. It's not always a meal I'm looking for. Sometimes it's a conversation I once had, a ritual I once witnessed, a quiet habit I've kept alive through the years. This one came from my old sous chef, a wiry Scotsman with a bark louder than his bite. He ran the line like a battlefield, but at the end of the shift, he had his ceremony. A small plate, 3 crackers, no more. Stilton, sliced thick, and a thin slice of apple, cut fresh with the paring knife he always kept on him. That, and a glass of port, which he sipped like medicine. I admired the precision of it, not the food, but the restraint, the respect. He never overdid it, never turned it into a cheese board, or added a drizzle of honey. He said the apple brought out the Stilton's better side. Sweet dreams don't always need sugar, he once muttered, half to himself. And then he leaned back, eyes half closed, like he was tasting the end of the day, instead of the cheese. At the time, I was still rushing, still trying to impress even myself with midnight snacks that involved flame and flair. But the longer I cooked professionally, the more I began to understand him. The value of something small, deliberate, unshowy, something that left room for sleep, rather than competing with it. I adapted his ritual to suit me. I don't keep port in the house, never took to it, but I found that the combination worked just as well with tea. Something black and a little bitter, cool just enough to sip without effort. The apple wakes you up slightly. The cheese settles you back down. The crackers remind you to chew. Here's how I prepare it now, when the kitchen is quiet and I want to feel the day winding down. I start with the apple, crisp, cold, and not too sweet. Granny Smith if I've got it. Jazz or Pink Lady if the mood calls for more perfume. I slice it thin, really thin, so each piece folds slightly as it rests. I never prep the apple in advance. Part of the ritual is the slicing, the way it slows the hands, steadies the breath. Next, the Stilton. Not a wedge, just enough for 3 crackers. I let it sit out for 10 minutes, if I remember, so the cold doesn't mute its voice. Stilton has presence, it doesn't need volume. A modest spread is plenty, just enough to soften the salt of the cracker and contrast the cool fruit. The crackers are always plain, water biscuits or oat cakes. Sometimes if I'm out, I'll toast a thin slice of bread until brittle and break it into uneven chips. The goal isn't crunch, it's quiet structure. I assemble them side by side on a small plate, apple on top or to the side, depends on the day. I pour the tea last, Earl Grey if I want perfume. English breakfast if I want weight. I take the plate to the window, where the streetlight sketches soft outlines across the sill, and I eat slowly, one bite at a time, one breath at a time, and somewhere between the first cracker and the third, the body begins to forgive the day, not forget, but soften. I think that's what my old Susha was chasing. Not indulgence, closure. Some nights sweet isn't what you need. You need something earthy, clean, sharp at the edges, but not jagged. Something that pairs with stillness. A cracker, a crumble of cheese, a slice of apple paper thin, and a sleep that asks for nothing but quiet. Good night. That was recipe 7. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep.